Don't you just hate laundry? And I'm not talking about that dirty hamper in the corner of your room either. I'm talking about this guy, Brian Laundrie, the young man who killed Gabby Petito back in 2021. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard at least a little bit about this story. I first heard about it back in 2021 when Brian went missing and Dog the Bounty Hunter of all people was gonna bring him in. In all likelihood, you've heard most of the details about Gabby Petito's murder. So today, I don't want to focus too much on the story of the murder that you've already heard, but rather on the man, the dynamics, the psyche, and the morals behind the relationship, the murder, and the attempted cover-up. Let's get into it. Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito met in high school. He later described it to his friends as love at first sight when he pulled over to talk to her outside a deli. In a normal relationship, this is pretty standard. You always say that, it was love at first sight. But in this case, it just seems a little bit weird that, obviously Gabby had no idea that craving a turkey sub was going to lead to the end of her life. It wasn't until 2 years later, after they had graduated high school, that the two began a romantic relationship. When Brian wooed Gabby, it was mostly behind closed doors. Friends and family say Gabby was very tight-lipped about the relationship at the beginning, and by the time that they found out about it, it was already very serious. This is where I, a person with no background in psychology and no degree in psychology, begins to dig into Brian Laundrie's psychology. It reminds me of what author Robert Greene stated. A narcissist does not wear a sign saying, "I'm a narcissist, stay away." They learn from a young age how to act charming, kind, and interested in you, but only as a form of manipulation. The fact that the relationship was kept so under wraps at the beginning makes me think Brian was already weaving his web. A big domino to fall in this entire story is when Brian convinced Gabby to move to Florida with him in order to be closer to his family. And let me make this clear, there's nothing technically wrong with doing that and moving close to your significant other's family. But if you are going to take that giant leap, it'll become very isolating unless you have a good relationship with your significant other's family. And it sounds like Roberta Laundrie and Gabby Petito had a dubious relationship at best. Then things took a bigger step when Brian proposed, and he did this without asking Gabby's father for her hand in marriage, which really rubbed him the wrong way, and it just didn't seem like something originally Brian would do until he moved to Florida. Gabby didn't even really want to tell anyone, and it was found out by a lot of people by her social media posts. When Gabby moved to Florida, she became friends with Rose Davis, and she says that she could tell Brian was off immediately. She claims that Brian acted more like a parent watching over Gabby than a boyfriend or a significant other. And then Rose Davis came out and claimed that Brian always had a dark side. Despite having a very cordial demeanor and a friendly facade, Brian was known to have a short temper. Brian's former coworker Michael Livingston opened up about him in an interview. He never came across as the kind of person that would be the killing type, but he did have a tendency to be, I don't want to say the wrong thing and make him sound worse than he already is, he was the kind of guy who would get pissed off pretty quickly. Livingston went on to describe Brian as a yoga nut and a weirdo and said that around Gabby, he would come over and do the boyfriend thing, put his arm around her, give her a kiss. Very possessive. Alas, nothing illegal about being possessive or a weirdo, right? Remember I said that. In text messages shown in the Netflix documentary between Gabby and Brian, Brian disparages her coworkers at Taco Bell, where Gabby worked while saving up for her van life blog, saying she worked with lowlives, and it was disgusting that she was one of them. Personally, I find this pretty interesting because Brian and Gabby, prior to COVID, worked together at Publix grocery store. So once she started going for this van life dream and working at Taco Bell to support it, that's when he became angry. When she was out of his sight for even 1 minute. In fact, it seems like he tried to smother every aspect of her life, but he couldn't get rid of her van life dream. Gabby's friend Rose Davis claims that Brian was never supportive of the van life dream. She says that Brian was beginning to feel neglected by it, actually. So if you really think about it, Gabby was doing her damn thing. She was grinding 50 hours a week at Taco Bell. She finally bought the van. She was getting the gear to do her van life blog, and then she forgot about one thing. She had dirty laundry attached to her. An unsupportive mama's boy man-child who was threatened by his fiance's dream rather than supporting it. And from everything that I've heard, I don't believe that he really was going with her to be supportive. I think in his mind he owned her and she couldn't be running off without him. That's the only reason he decided to even go along in the first place. And if the rumors of them having a rocky relationship before the trip are true, it definitely opened Gabby's eyes up being on the road with this guy 24/7. I think that during the trip she finally began to see the truth. That Brian Laundrie was an awful person. And now we got to talk about the police interaction, but I don't want to go too much into this. I'm sure it's been beat to death already. And I'm sure that you guys already know that Brian is the one who flipped the script and made it seem like Gabby was the one attacking him and she was the crazy one. And the police ended up sending him to a motel and making Gabby sleep in the van. That's just me glossing over it. If you really want to get into more of that, I'm sure you can find it pretty much anywhere. But what I do want to talk about is something that Officer Pratt said after the fact when he tried justifying not arresting Laundrie or taking further steps. He said, "There's no law against being a shitty boyfriend and gaslighting and taking advantage of people mentally and emotionally for your own reasons." Yeah, okay, just like being a weirdo is not illegal. But you know what is illegal? Murder. So after this incident with the police, Brian actually flew home back to Florida and Gabby was on her own. And while she was on her own, she reached out to her ex-boyfriend, Jackson. So at this point, it seems that she was done with Brian. She told Jackson that she had a plan to get away from him and break things off for good. Then Brian caught up with her somewhere along the way. It seems Gabby called Jackson again, but he was working and wasn't able to answer his phone. And they were last seen arguing at a restaurant. Then on August 28th, 2021, he took her life. Immediately after taking her life, he called his mom, Roberta, and we can only speculate here, but I'm pretty sure he told her that he murdered Gabby because they lawyered up impressively fast. The ever remorseful Brian Laundrie proceeded to steal Gabby's phone and her wallet and her debit card. Oh, and her van. He also Venmo'd himself $700 with a note saying, "Goodbye, Brian. I'll never ask you for anything again." I think that these acts alone show that he thought at this point he could still get away with what he did. Then, while Gabby was still missing, he showed up back in Florida with the van. While the police attempted to investigate, they went to the Laundrie's house, but the Laundries were uncooperative. Brian did not speak to the police, and the search for Gabby continued. Then a wellness check was called in for Brian, but when the police went to the Laundrie house, Brian was nowhere to be found.
The FBI confirmed the remains found in a Florida nature preserve on Wednesday are those of Brian Laundrie. Dental records were used to help identify the 23-year-old's body. Laundrie's parents had been to the preserve with investigators. His backpack and notebook were also found in the park, said Michael McPherson, agent in charge of the FBI Tampa field office.
This occurred as an unexpected tragedy, rushing back to our car trying to cross the streams. Before it got too dark to see, too cold, I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. Shouted her name. I found her breathing heavily, gasping. She was freezing. This is just a short excerpt from the rambling letter of Brian Laundrie. And of course, I can't say for sure it's completely made up, but if you were to ask me what I think that there's a better chance a unicorn just farted somewhere than this being what actually happened to Gabby Petito. Honestly, it just seems like fanfic made by a complete narcissist who blamed Gabby to the end. She fell in. She asked me to kill her. Really? And it doesn't take a genius to realize if this had even an iota of truth, then he wouldn't have behaved the way he did after the fact, stealing all her stuff and Venmoing himself $700. In my opinion, he thought he was going to get away with it. And I believe his parents did their best effort to help him get away with it. And it was only once the walls began to close in that he took the coward's way out. But there's also something else that I found very interesting that I wanted to take a deeper dive into. I wanted to look at Brian Laundrie's handwriting on this letter. According to a study, there are some common handwriting characteristics shared by known serial killers. Number 1, unusual spacing between words. Number 2, unusual punctuation. Number 3, extremely wide spacing between words or identical to the spacing between letters. Number 4, strange ending of letters. Number 5, printed letters. Number 6, overabundance of punctuation or none at all. There was also a few more troubling handwriting characteristics of serial killers: left of upright slant, large or extreme height differentials, or covering the whole page. Now, am I saying Brian Laundrie was going to become a serial killer? Of course not. But it is a little bit, at least, interesting to look at how many of these handwriting characteristics he had in that letter. And if you want to give Brian Laundrie the benefit of the doubt, you could say that he was under duress and that this isn't even his normal style of handwriting, which would be fair. It's just something I wanted to bring attention to, just how many of these traits that he hit on. I truly believe that Brian had some form of mental illness, and Gabby Petito's parents seem to agree. It's pretty clear that Brian was having some type of mental health crisis, and it would have been positive to him to get help, Petito's father Joseph said on Banfield. But Brian's letter wasn't the only letter in this saga, and the letter by Roberta Laundrie, I actually find more interesting than Brian's. I just want you to remember, I will always love you, and I know you will always love me. You are my boy. Nothing can make me stop loving you. Nothing will or could ever divide us. No matter what we do, or where we go, or what we say, we will always love each other. If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. If you fly to the moon, I will be watching the skies for your re-entry. If you say you hate my guts, I'll get new guts. Remember that love is a verb, not a noun. It's not a thing, it's not words, it is actions. Watch people's actions to know if they love you. Roberta Laundrie claims that she wrote that letter before the trip even began. Sure, Roberta, sure. I truly love my son, she said, and simply wanted to convey to him how much he meant to me and how much I loved him. I am sure people use phrases all the time to express to their loved ones the depths of their love. Although I chose words that I thought would be impactful with Brian given our relationship, the letter was in no way related to Gabby. What a load of barnacles. I'm starting to think the entire Laundrie family is psycho. His sister also tends to go on Instagram and post suicide awareness prevention things, if nothing else show a huge lack of self-awareness. She gets roasted fairly heavily in the comments and seems to enjoy the attention. While the Laundrie family claims no wrongdoing and complains about being shunned by the community, the Petito family fights for any shred of justice that they can, and through it all, 2 people are dead. They cease to live due to one man's decisions to take both of their lives for his own selfish reasons. He was just a little odd, a weirdo, socially awkward. Then he was controlling, a shitty boyfriend, a gaslighter. Then he was physically abusive, and then he was a murderer.